Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black coming back with another Raw review. Alright, Raw today wasn't actually too bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't really too bad. At least they kept on point as far as, talking about what's going to be going on at Night of Champions this weekend, this Saturday coming and stuff. So at least they stayed on point. There was a couple of matches that really didn't, I really didn't care about and stuff. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and start off, and we're gonna do this match by match and whatever happened backstage. Okay, we got Obafemi coming out. You know, saying that he was born, for he was bound for this destiny. He was born to be where he's at right now, and that his destiny, is going to be the part to where, you know, um, makes him king in the ring. And they also mentioned that his destiny brought him to WWE, and that it's going to make him king of the ring, and it's going to make him champion and stuff. Saying that when he does go and win King of the Ring, he has two options, and one is for the undisputed title, and one is for the world title. Saying which one, he should go for, and then out comes Jey Uso, and Jey Uso is telling Oba, that he's him, more or less like he's the one, saying that they counted him out, when he beat Gunther for the world title, and they counted him out, when he won the Royal Rumble, you know, and they keep counting him out, for big matches, but he's always been there to try to prove people wrong and stuff. And so far he has, Jey Uso, they call him main event Jey Uso, and they don't call him that for nothing and everything. And then he said that nobody's counting on him, to win King of the Ring, and certainly no one's counting on him, to be Oba, and he's like telling Oba that he's going to, beat him because he is that guy and stuff, and then he goes on to tell Oba, hey, this is your warning shot. Then Oba goes and tells Jay, to take his best shot, because if he fails, he's going to beat him down. And if he misses, even he's still going to beat him down. Even if he does, try to get some up on him and everything, he's still going to take him down, you know. And and then Oba says to him, to take his bullets and give them all to his cousin, which is Roman Reigns, courtesy of Oba Femi. Oba drops the mic and he walks off, and Jay looks pretty weird in the ring and stuff. And then we got LA Knight, and Adam Pearce, and LA Knight is actually complaining, about what happened last week and everything. And then Jimmy comes out, and then Jimmy saying that, hey, he had his back and stuff like that, and then they're arguing and stuff like that. And Adam, then says, hey, look, Jimmy and LA Knight, you guys handle it and everything, get in the ring and, and see what happens. And then LA Knight saying they hope it doesn't have to repeat, what happened last week and everything when there was some interference and stuff like that. But anyway, it wasn't anything that, Jay was looking for and stuff like that. Solo interfered and it actually caused LA Knight, the match had nothing to do, with them as far as the Usos were concerned and stuff. Then we got Lyra and Bayley, they're talking about, tonight is their night and that they're going to win the tag team titles from Paige and Brie Bella and stuff. And then the match goes on, you got Brie Bella and Paige, versus Bayley and Lyra Valkyria and stuff, So the match goes on. It was okay. It started out pretty funky and stuff like that throughout the match and stuff. It wasn't a great match or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, Paige hits Lyra with the rampage and pins Lyra for the win. And then Bayley goes to Lyra and stuff, and she's trying to, to console her and stuff like that. They embrace And then all of a sudden, Lyra Valkyria flips on Bayley and she tosses her into the ring ropes and stuff. And then she just goes on and to beat Bayley down. I mean, she beat Bayley down and stuff. So, there's going to be some flack and stuff like that with Bayley and Lyra um, coming soon. It'll probably start next week. So, hopefully, they get the storyline. I'm sure a lot of people say they don't care about what's going on and stuff like that, but it's wrestling. So, let's see what happens. And then we have a segment in the ring with Chad Gable. He calls out Otis, Tasawa, and Maxine Dupree. And he says that he's done some bad things to them, and he's out there, apologize, saying that he wants to apologize to them on the way that he treated them, when they were with the Alpha Academy and stuff like that. So he individually calls them out and stuff like that, saying that Maxine Dupree, you know, she did something that he didn't do and stuff like that when she won the women's IC title against Becky Lynch, and then he went on and tell, Tosawa that he has a heart of a lion and stuff, and then went to Otis and was saying that Otis and him known each other for quite some time, and that Otis held his daughters and stuff like that, and everything, and so Chad extends his hand to thank them and stuff, and then Otis was about to, and then Maxine Dupree comes in, steps in the way, and tells Chad that she doesn't trust him. You know, she doesn't believe, what he's doing and that he's lying, and goes on to tell him how he treated them and stuff like that and stuff, and how she had to try to stop, Chad from doing certain bad things to them and everything. And then she reminds Chad Gable on how he left him, saying that he left him high and dry for failure, and stuff like that. But they all went on. I mean, Maxine at least went on and, she accomplished some stuff like that. And then she's saying that, it's done. They're going to leave him like he left them and stuff alone. And then they get out, they all leave the ring. Otis hesitated, but then all of a sudden he just jumped out of the ring and everything. And then we get another backstage with Rey Mysterio talking with Dragon Lee. And then Penta shows up, and then Ray is telling Dragon Lee, you know, to put Ethan Page in his place and stuff. Then we get the match with Ethan Page and Dragon Lee. The match is pretty. I mean, the match was pretty good and stuff. Um, it went okay. I mean, there was no interference and everything and stuff. I mean, Ethan Page, kind of cheated his way a little bit in there. He gave him a little headbutt, a little low blow headbutt, between the legs, and then he egoplexed Dragon Lee for the win. And then you get backstage, Jackie Redmond talking to Division, and then Logan Paul is telling her that if he was a betting man, that he put his money on Division to retain, the tag team titles, and we know it's not him. It's going to be Austin Theory and Braun Breaker who will be defending the titles against the Street Profits and stuff. And then Braun Breaker steps in and says that, at Night of Champion, he's going to put Seth Rollins in his place. He's going to take him out, at Night of Champions and stuff. And then we get Io coming out, Io Sky coming out, and she's talking to Jackie, and then Io says that she's ready. She's gonna she beat Raquel Rodriguez and everything to get to where she was at and everything, and that she's gonna go on to beat Liv Morgan, and become Queen of the Ring. But then out comes Liv Morgan telling Io, she won't be here because she's better than her and stuff and everything, and then saying that she's the face of the company, and all she is missing is her crown. Saying when she beats Io, then she's gonna go on to SummerSlam and beat Rhea Ripley. Then Io says to Liv, she said, I tell her, she said, "Are you sure that crown is gonna fit on that big head of yours?" and stuff. And it says Liv is, then she tells Liv that she's arrogant, and then, Eel breaks off in Japanese, and she starts going crazy on Liv, and then Liv, nails her, and then they start to brawl and stuff, and then the officials come out and everything, to break it up. Eel had already put Liv out, and Liv is out of the ring and stuff. So that should be a pretty good one. Also, at least they're addressing the fact that the matches for the upcoming PLE United Champions. Then we got Jimmy and Jay, um, and then Jacob comes out, and Jay asks where Jacob's been, and why why was he at SmackDown talking to Solo Sikoa, and Jacob tells him, that he was sent there on a mission, from Roman, and that there were some things that, Solo needed to hear and stuff. And then Jay's, basically saying, hey, look, Solo could be on his way over here to Raw and stuff, so what they're gonna do about it and stuff. And then, at one point, you know, um, Jay was talking crap to Jacob, and Jacob said, hey, you don't answer to Jay and stuff. He said he don't answer to Jay's punk ass and stuff. So, there's still a little bit of friction between Jay and Jacob. Hopefully that comes, to order. But somehow some crazy is about to happen there. Something real crazy is gonna happen there. But anyway, then we get a little Danhauser with the Judgment Day. Dom is asking for his money and stuff like that. And Danhausen is like telling him that his money has been, spent and everything and stuff. And then he curses, JD McDonough. And JD McDonough, doesn't like the fact that he got cursed. And then he touches something, that in Danhausen's little hut and stuff, and then JD McDonough gets, shocked, electrocuted. Then we got LA Knight and Jimmy Uso. The match was okay. I mean, the match was pretty good. I mean, both guys are pretty good in the ring. It was a real good match. They did their thing and stuff like that. It was no significant of anything going on for this match. It was just a match that was thrown together, because they were arguing, and then Adam Pearce put the match together. Then as they're, fighting and stuff, then out comes Solo Sikoa. Solo's up on the top rope, getting ready to do a move. LA Knight comes up there to him. LA Knight, sees Solo, and Jimmy pushes him down. Then Solo comes up on the side of the ring. He hits Jimmy with the Samoan spike, and it causes Jimmy to lose because LA Knight hits Jimmy with the BFT and takes him out. And then you got Jackie backstage with the Street Profits, and they're saying they're not here to play, that they're here, that they're there, to beat the Vision and to become the new tag team champions and stuff. And then they're saying, hey, we're gonna do that because the Street Profits are up and they want the smoke and stuff. And then Jackie is asking, then you get backstage again, Jackie's been around all day. But anyway, you got Jackie asking Bayley, did she see Lyra Valkyria coming doing what she did to her, and then Bayley say, hey, she don't want to talk about it and stuff. And then you get the Judgment Day, they're kind of a little bit out of place also, you know, um, and then Liv comes in and saying that, Raquel will, go on to beat, Solo Sikoa, and then JD and Dom need to pay attention about taking the title off of Penta. And then Roxanne asks, what about her? And I think Liv kind of ignores her, and they walk off, with JD McDonough to go, look for the medics to see if he's okay for next week's battle, which is crazy. Then you got Corey Graves and Seth Rollins, Seth Rollins saying that, WrestleMania and Backlash, wasn't his night, and stuff like that, and saying if he can beat Braun Breaker, then he can put the Vision behind him and stuff and go after, a title, that he never lost. And it's crazy how everybody keeps saying that. It's about the fact that, titles that they've never lost. Well, if they never lost them, they would still have them. So he doesn't have a title, so he lost the title, whether it was in a triple threat or however the case may be. You didn't win, so the title's not yours. It kills me when they say that. Then you got Adam Pearce and Chad Gable talking. Then Dom and JD McDonough come out and everything. Um, and then not JD, but Dom is asking where his apologies at and stuff and everything. And then Chad, challenges Dom. He said, hey, if you want an apology, beat the apology out of him. And then, Dom is saying, hey, look, you don't, do matches like that and stuff like that. And then he's talking about, JD would be the one, to take him on, for next week. So we'll see what happens next week. And then we get the Street Profits in the Vision fighting for the tag team titles and stuff, And the match was, I mean, it was okay. It was pretty good and stuff. The match was going on pretty well. And then Logan Paul, he decides to interfere into the match, so he got, thrown out from ringside and stuff for interfering. And then the match kept going on and everything. And then Logan Paul, he comes out again, but this time he comes out with some brass knuckles. Then all of a sudden, Joe Hendry shows up, and he comes out and he chases Logan Paul away. Then Austin Theory goes for the brass knuckles, and then as he's going for the brass knuckles, then Seth Rollins comes out, and Seth Rollins comes out and he grabs the brass knuckles. Then he nails Austin Theory with the brass knuckles, and then Breaker comes around and he chases Seth Rollins, out of the ring area and stuff. And then Montez Ford, and Angelo Dawkins, take care of Austin Theory, and Montez Ford ends up doing the frog splash, on Austin Theory. And we have new world tag team champions in the Street Profits. So it wasn't too bad of a show. I mean, it was okay. At least they did focus on the stuff that's going to be happening, this weekend as far as Night of Champions. So with that, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you feel. If you agree or disagree with anything that I said, leave it in the comment. All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.